Our freedom, our sense of being able to really be at home, to feel at ease, is inextricably all connected. We are all impacted by suffering that exists in the world. How do we hold that? And how can we come together to find ways to be able to transform it?
So my talk is on shifting conversations here in the United States about Israelis and Palestinians. Why do we have compassion for the people that we do? And who is missing from those conversations about compassion? Who's not being talked about in a compassionate way? Who's not being presented in an empathetic light? And why is that?
My talk is on the question, are we wired for compassion? The field of neuroscience and psychology have been looking into this question for the past couple of decades. And we're actually finding that not only does it seem like we're wired for compassion, but we actually have a bias built in for compassion.
When we can first begin to really sense and feel ourselves as being recipients of care, that really helps us to begin to connect with our own capacities to feel care for others.
And I came across a poem in Arabic called Rivers. And it took me a while, and then I realized that's Langston Hughes, written in Arabic. Palestinians everywhere have found a deep resonance with the experiences of Black Americans. So part of my research has been uncovering that history, and I'm excited to share it with the Downtown Lecture Series audience.
Very recently, some researchers at Princeton University actually found that if you think about removing pain or lessening that person's suffering, you actually get reward centers lighting up in your brain. You're hardwired for this, but there are certain things you can do to train it. So my talk will have a sprinkling of different types of practices that you can do and things that you might not be thinking of as compassion training. So going to the homeless shelter, for example, and giving some of your time, that's a compassion training.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is J.P. Jones. I'm the Don Bennett Moon Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, the University of Arizona's People College. And it's a delight to welcome you back to the Fox for the second lecture in our series on compassion. I'd also like to give a shout out to all those people who are watching on our YouTube channel, including students who are in SBS Online. Last week, Leslie Langbert gave an excellent lecture on the spiritual and secular dimensions of mindfulness. And tonight we're going to switch gears and hear a talk about compassion and cognitive science, the brain and compassion. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to thank a few people who have made this series possible, starting with our series sponsor, the Stonewall Foundation Fund, and a special shout out to Rick and Bill and Kathleen Small for their support. Our supporting sponsors are Mike and Beth Kasser and Hulualua Companies, and thank you, Mike and Beth, for your ongoing support for the series, the Downtown Lecture Series, and also Tucson Medical Center, whose own work on wellness in this community is well known, and we certainly hope that these lectures can help their professionals and also their patients find compassion in their lives. Our community sponsors are good friends. My friends up in Mesa, Roween Gary Medina and Roy Medina, a shout out to them, and my friends in Saddlebrook, Joanne Ellison and Dr. Barbara Starrett. And I'd also like to thank Tiana and Jeff Bronstadt for their support, as well as Tucson Lifestyle for being a media sponsor. And not last, the wonderful people at the Fox Theater who have opened back up to this community in a safe way. So let's give a big hand for everyone. Thank you for that. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Jay Sanguinetti, and he is an assistant research professor in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and also the associate director for the Center for Consciousness Studies in the college. And I'm guessing that many of you in the audience may not know that modern consciousness studies sort of has its origins here in Tucson at the University of Arizona and in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, right around 1994. And that's one of the great works that the Center for Consciousness Studies was founded for and is interested in continuing to promote. It's also probably one of the reasons that Jay decided to move across country to Tucson, Arizona to do his master's and his PhD degree here at the U of A in cognition and neural systems. Jay's work is in part on psychophysiological measurements using EEG and fMRI and eye tracking instrumentation to help solve problems associated with visual perception and emotion and mindfulness. And more recently, he received an NIH grant, National Institutes of Health grant, for $3.4 million to develop therapeutic interventions using non-invasive brain stimulation, also known as transcranial ultrasound, with the intent on solving problems of cognition, including memory loss, and also mood disorders, including depression, and addiction, and chronic pain. Really fascinating work with huge amounts of potential moving forward. This work has been published in journals such as Frontiers in Human Neuroscience and Brain Sciences. Jay's been asked to speak all over Europe and the United States. And research has been featured in diverse outlets such as Wired Magazine and PC Magazine and HuffPost and PBS NewsHour. Please join me in giving a warm Fox welcome to Dr. Jay Sanguinetti.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, JP. And thanks to everybody who came today. It is so good to be with you and to be in person. And I also want to thank the audience out there in internet land. Thanks for tuning in from home, and thanks to all of our students for coming today. Now, I am so happy to be here today to explore with you compassion through the lens of science. And my hope for you today is something that I say, some science that I show you, will give you some insight about this capacity that you have built inside of you. But I actually have a little bit of an agenda for you as well. I hope that that insight actually motivates you to cultivate a little bit more of that in your own life, and that you bring that into the world. Now, in science, we're often trying to define what we're talking about so we can measure what we think we're measuring. And with compassion, that's quite difficult. It's a complex topic. And so I want to actually give you a story from my own life that I've never told publicly, because I think it will unpack and unfold compassion for you. Now, this is Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. This is where I lived before Tucson. And as you can see, it's quite the opposite environment. This is an island in North Carolina, and it was a very happy time in my life, but I was 19 or 20, also a bit of an emotional time for me. And I used to go down to the end of the beach at night, look at the stars. One night I was walking home down the road that you see behind me, and I see a big group of people around a bar. Now, I know what this means. There's a military base down the road. The Iraqi war was happening. The soldiers were probably back, and they're letting off some steam, probably getting in fights. And so I walk up to this scene, which looks a bit like something out of a movie. It's this beautiful backdrop. These big guys are fighting each other with blood all over them. To be honest, it's a little bit exciting, so I walked up to see what was going on. And as I walked up, I see the bigger guy knock the other one out. And the other guy falls back to the ground and hits his head right on the pavement. And at this point, excitement's turning to a little bit of fear. And then something horrible happened. The bigger guy walks up to the guy on the ground and picks up his foot and puts it right above his head. This is like a horror movie now, right? He's going to smash this guy's head on the ground. And I knew that this was a soldier, and I knew that he had been seeing a lot of horrific things. And so as I'm watching this, I'm turning to panic, and everyone in the audience, everyone in the group there was panicking as well. And then something happened. I was feeling his anger deeply. I could feel how angry this guy was. But I felt something underneath that, like some pain or some suffering. And at that time, I thought it was something that had happened at the Iraqi war. And so in my bones, I felt something pushing me in that moment, while he's got his leg above this guy about to hurt him, to go up to him and put my hand on his shoulder and say, hey, it's okay. I feel this pain, and you don't have to do this. So what did I do? Well, of course, I froze. I'm a chicken, and this was a guy who was trained to hurt people. He was also twice my size, and so I wasn't going to go up to him, and everyone else there actually froze. What happened is his other soldiers came out of the bar and threw him to the ground before he did this. And as the other guy, people were sort of paying attention to him and helping him, I saw this guy sitting there on the ground. And again, I felt something inside of me pushing me to go up to him. And so I did. And again, I felt fear. This guy's angry, and he probably knows how to hurt people. And I again felt that deeper connection to his pain. I was in a little bit of pain myself, actually. And so with a little bit of bravery or courage or whatever you want to call it, I walked up to him and I put my hand on his shoulder. And I half expected him to hit me, but I just said, hey, I feel your pain. And I feel that you may feel that nobody else is connected to that pain, but I feel it, and I just want you to know. And then I kind of stepped back and waited for him to punch me in the face. And instead, he did the opposite. He just started bawling. These tears started coming out of his eyes. I was totally not expecting this. And when he stopped crying, he looked back at me, and he said, my whole purpose in life was to go to Iraq, protect this country from these terrorists, protect my family, and protect you, strangers. And the one moment I get to come home from that horrible war, I open the door, and my wife is sleeping with my best friend, right? And you can feel that, right? That deep pain, that type of pain that's reorienting his whole worldview. And he looked at me and he said, stranger, I don't know why you did that, but it's helping. It's helping me, right? And so I said, you're welcome, thanks for not punching me. And I walked home. And as I was walking home, a lot of what I was carrying myself seemed to lift. Some of that emotional stuff that I was going through. And I had this sort of glow about me, which is now being termed the compassion glow in the literature. It sort of transformed that one simple act of putting my hand on his shoulder and maybe putting myself out there a little bit, transformed that inner experience for me for days, actually. And so somewhere in that story is compassion. And what I want to do today is unpack the way that we look at that through the lens of science to see if we can explain a little bit more of what that is for you. Now, in science, we are always trying to figure out the boundaries of what we're talking about. Aristotle called this carving nature at its joints. And we want to know what's the difference between compassion and like equanimity, for example, or compassion and empathy. I like to start with the etymology of a word. So this is the Latin of compassion, compati, which means to suffer with. Now think back to my story. I wasn't just having sympathy for him. I wasn't just looking down with pity on his pain. I was feeling it in my bones, like in my body. So that's the starting point for compassion. It's being in there. Actually, he said to me, in the trenches with his pain. I thought that was a little on the nose for him. But that's compassion. It's being with people and their pain. And what we've learned so far from this new science of compassion is that you do seem to be wired for this capacity, but it is not automatic. And as I'll talk about today, it's competing against a lot of other things that you're also wired for. It has to be cultivated. Some people have a little bit more at baseline than others, but it can be grown inside of you. And then when you do that, what we see is it has all kinds of awesome health benefits for you, for the people around you, and I'll argue our whole society. So that's what we're going to dig into today. Now, talking about what compassion is and isn't, often we think of compassion and empathy as very similar things, but actually in the science, empathy seems to be separate but related to compassion. So empathy is your ability to feel and understand what someone else is having as an emotion or suffering. And if you ever, like me, back in 2018, have been on an airplane, there were 5 babies on this airplane, and you'll know that if one baby starts crying, the other one starts crying, and then it just spreads to all of them. At this point on the airplane, I was so happy I remembered to bring my noise-canceling headphones. Babies are super cute, but when 5 of them are crying on an airplane, yeah, you want to drown it out. So this is called mimicry. This is innate, it's built in, it's wired in, and it's automatic. And it serves as the foundation for being able to emotionally resonate with other people. So serves as a foundation for both empathy and compassion, but really our ability to feel what other people are feeling so that we can decide what to do with that. And as we'll talk about later, this likely helped us evolve in the first place. Now, it's not just babies that have this capacity. You also have this in your brain. So if you've ever seen someone get their hand smashed into a door, you'll sort of go, ooh, right? You'll feel it in your finger. You'll feel it in your hand. Well, it turns out that compassion, empathy researchers seem to be kind of mean. They'll put people in MRI scanners and they'll show them pictures of people getting their hand smashed or accidentally hammering their finger with lots of blood. I've actually extracted out a cartoon here for you because I didn't want to show you the actual stimuli. They're really kind of gruesome. And what you tend to see if you're seeing someone in pain or feeling or hearing someone in pain is the same brain regions that are activated when you experience pain are activated when you watch someone else in that pain. So the anterior cingulate cortex, the insular cortex, these deeper brain regions, the same ones that you feel with, you're feeling someone else's feelings with. I think that's pretty cool. But empathy is not just about automatically feeling, right? We have this evolved, beautiful prefrontal cortex, and part of that prefrontal cortex allows us to imagine what it's like to be other people, to feel what they feel. We can put ourselves in their shoes. I really like this story of this little boy who saves up money for a couple years. He wants to buy a puppy dog, and so he goes to this farm out in the country, and he gives all the money to the farmer. The dog comes out, it's a beautiful collie, and the boy lights up. He's like, yes, I want this dog. And then he sees this other dog that's just got a messed up leg, sort of hobbling out of the house. And the little boy says, that's the one I want. And the farmer's like, why would you want that dog? This dog is healthy, it's going to play catch. This is the one you want. You don't want that one, little boy. And he lifts up his pants leg and reveals that he doesn't have a right leg. And the little boy says, I want that dog because he needs someone who can understand him. Right? So we have this capacity, even at like the age of 7 or 8, to start thinking about what it's like for other people and then using that to act in the world. And so this whole distributed network is what we're using for empathy. It's wired into you. And you use different networks depending on different situations. So it's an adaptive system. But compassion is a little something different. It's not just empathy. It seems to be built on top of it or maybe subsuming it. Really what compassion is the feeling and understanding of someone's suffering. So that's the empathic part. But it's also being moved to try to alleviate it. So that's my story of the soldier. It's not just that I felt his pain, but somehow by connecting with him, I was moved deeply to do something about it. And that's really where compassion comes in. Now, often when you talk about being wired, you think of evolution. If you think of evolution, you might wonder, how does empathy or compassion fit into this model? Evolution is something like survival of the fittest. Everyone is selfish. You're out to get all the resources for yourself so you can spread your genes. What would be the point of compassion in that model? How does that even fit? And to be honest, science in general had a really hard time fitting compassion until about 30 years ago. Most scientists would say it's not even somehow you're being compassionate and not just something that's selfish. It looks like compassion, but it's just selfishness somehow. But actually, if you go back to Darwin and you look in The Descent of Man, he was saying things like this: communities which include the greatest number of the most sympathetic members, or compassionate, would flourish the best. They would rear the most offspring. So even back then with Darwin, he was arguing that compassion and kindness is a form of fitness. It's helping you to survive within the evolutionary pressures that you're in. And he actually argued that being in communities is probably what helped us survive in the first place. Now, when we look to our closest evolutionary relatives, we see behaviors that look something like compassion. Now, we have to call it altruism because we can't ask the chimpanzees if they're feeling compassionate, but they at least do things that better others without getting any reward for themselves. There's actually a case where a little boy, back in 1996, I believe, fell into an enclosure at a zoo in Cincinnati with a bunch of apes. And one of the bigger apes walks up to the little boy in a stance, like he's going to hurt him. And an 8-year-old ape with a baby on her back walks up to this little boy, picks him up and coddles him, and protects him until the humans that are in the zoo can figure out how to get in and save that little boy's life. Right? So this is a capacity that is not just in us. I mean, that 8-year-old mother had her own baby on her back, and those big apes could have hurt her, actually. But she instead acted in a way that benefited another species. It's pretty amazing, actually. And so researchers have actually looked at this in our closest kin, and they found that even when you set up experiments, you can see chimpanzees and other close apes actually acting in ways that benefit other chimps and humans and other off-species animals like kitty cats, for example. So this is built in right from the start. When we look at compassion in science, as I said, we want to try to be careful about our definitions. And as I said, the science is very young, so we're still learning a lot, and there's a lot to know about this. But many researchers are now thinking that compassion is an unfolding process. So the story that I gave you, there was a lot that was going on between the moment when I felt for him and when I walked home and had that glow. And that's because it's a whole set of biological, psychological, and social processes that are playing out. Now, some researchers think that compassion may just be an emotion next to the other emotions. It could be competing emotions or multiple emotions together. But I like to think of it like this instead. Now, this is a little model that I built for you. This is not something that's published. But this is basically what happens when you first start feeling the empathy. You start feeling with people. It's actually a little bit stressful, right? So with that soldier, I was feeling his pain and his suffering. I was also feeling a little afraid because I didn't want to get hit by him. With compassion, you have to move into regulating that, using emotion regulation. And then you have to get motivated to actually act, to do something. And then something very special happens when you do that. It starts releasing a whole cascade of chemicals that feel good. Certain parts of your brain that deal with positive emotion become activated, and it turns that inner distress into something that's positive. And that's a really crucial piece of what compassion looks like. So keep this in mind as we kind of go through. Now, if there's one slide that you want to remember, this is the one. This is a review paper from Calderon and his colleagues. And they're basically reviewing most of the studies where they train people in either empathy or compassion. And they're putting all those studies together in one image, which I love. And basically what they find is that if you bring people in and you train them to feel for other people, empathy, then you put them in the MRI scanner and you show them a bunch of horrible pictures of people suffering, and they feel that empathy, this is what you see. So basically an activation in red of parts of the brain that deal with pain, as we spoke about, so like the insula and the amygdala, and an increase in trying to control that. But in blue, which means deactivation or less activation, you actually see the positive emotion areas, the reward areas, the motivation areas are turned down, right? So what empathy looks like is sort of feeling someone's pain. That's what it feels like. But it's not rewarding. It doesn't feel good. Now, the important thing that we know so far from the science is that when you start training compassion, that's what it looks like. You're switching out of this feeling and just feeling the pain into something that activates positive emotion centers in the prefrontal cortex, activating dopaminergic centers, reward centers, and the motivation to act. And then in blue, you see that those pain areas are decreased. And now it's very important to understand, blue doesn't mean off. Nothing ever turns off in the brain, in your body. It's just less active. And so blue means that you're still feeling someone's pain, but it's not overwhelming and you're controlling it. And at the same time, you're activating positive emotions and pleasure. And so these are the two slides. This is where you want to get from the empathic brain into that compassionate brain. My collaborator, Shinzen Young, is a really well-known mindfulness teacher, contemplative scholar, and just a beautiful mind person to be around. Shinzen actually just moved to Tucson last year to help me co-direct my lab at the University of Arizona. We are super lucky to have Shinzen here in Tucson. What Shinzen likes to say is, with compassion, you're sharing the pain, but you're not sharing the suffering. Right? So that's turning the definition a little bit. So sharing the pain and the suffering is that empathy brain, that empathic brain. But if you're sharing too much of the suffering, you're going to collapse into inaction. It's going to make you not want to do something because you want to protect yourself. And so compassion is actually feeling that pain with someone, but not allowing it to add too much suffering on top of that for you, because you need to do something, you need to act. And what that ends up doing is making you feel good in the end instead of making you suffer. So that's basically the state of the science. We can stop the talk here and you can go home, because that's basically all you need to know. But you got to get there. And the problem is it's a little bit hard to get out of that empathic brain and into that compassionate brain. So how do you do it? And what does the science say? Well, if you think back to my story about the soldier, I was feeling anger and pain deeply, right? But I also felt this calmness. I felt this sort of connection to him. And they were all happening at the same time. So what compassion looks like in the lab is it's really a balance between these conflicting states. This is something called equanimity. It's something we really study in our lab. But it's being sort of open to the experience without getting pulled one way or the other. So you're not getting rid of anger. You're feeling it. You're really feeling it. But you're not getting swept away by it. And you're not getting too calm. You're just sort of balancing the two so you can figure out what to do. And what that looks like when you train it with compassion is an increase in the parasympathetic activation. So you can think of this like your brake, just sort of allowing you to calm that stress so that you can figure out what to do. And there's a measure called heart rate variability, HRV, where when you train with compassion, you increase that HRV, which is suggesting that you're increasing your regulation of the parasympathetic system. And that seems to be a really crucial piece of compassion. Often when you ask people, what is compassion? They'll say, well, it's just like this Buddha with the big fat belly, and he's like up on the pedestal, and he's just feeling nothing. He's total bliss and in nirvana. But when you study it in the lab, it looks like this, actually. It's a whole bunch of emotions that are cascading as the person is feeling or trying not to feel. And then once you start making that connection with the other person, you're feeling with them, you start releasing a cascade of hormones and chemicals. Does anybody recognize this one? This is oxytocin. Looks complicated, right? Well, it is a very complicated chemical. And what this is often thought of as the love chemical or the love hormone, it's more than that. It's the bonding hormone. It's released when you are with your baby and you're feeling that love, that sort of loving bond. It also is related to in-group versus out-group, but importantly, when you start moving to compassion and feeling with someone, it's part of that connection. And actually, if you take people who have trouble with compassion, like people with autism, and you give them some oxytocin up their nose, they can actually squirt it up your nose now, it makes them more able to cultivate that compassion and to feel compassion. So it's related, it's a complicated story. How about this one? A little bit easier. This one's dopamine. So dopamine is also released once you start moving to compassion. And what this is doing is it's helping you learn what's rewarding and what to stay away from. It's also helping to drive you, to motivate you to do the action. And if you think back to my story, the really important piece was not just that I felt his pain really deeply, but I did something. So dopamine is related to that sort of motivating me, getting me in there to push me towards it. And then once you move to cultivating compassion in yourself, or you do compassionate acts in the world, it tends to protect you. So this gets back to the evolutionary story. It tends to do things to your immune system that protects you from future stress, or things like coronavirus, for example. And one of my favorite studies is from 1995. It's one of the older studies. What they did is they trained people with just 5 minutes of compassion. This is a technique that goes back to the early 90s. And the basic idea is that you cultivate positive emotions for someone that's sort of easy for you to do. So if you want to do this with me, we can try it for about 2 minutes. If you don't want to, you can just watch people around you look funny. But you just want to sort of sit up in your chair and get kind of loose. You can close your eyes if you want. And you want to bring your attention into your heart. Just feel your heart beating for a second. You can put your hand on your heart if you want. And then this is a little funny part. You want to feel yourself breathing out of your heart. I like to imagine I'm a big whale and my heart is the blowhole and I'm just breathing right out of it. And now you want to think of a time when you felt deep compassion for someone, or love, or connection. And then you just want to bring that into your heart, bring it into your body, and feel that compassion. And once you've done that, you want to bring a question to mind, or maybe a problem that you're trying to solve. And then let your heart answer that question. Okay, so that's what they did for 5 minutes. And the question is, after you do that, does it protect your immune system? They looked at something called salivary immunoglobulin A. We'll call it SIGA for short. This is expressed when you're stressed. You reduce it when you're stressed. And when you do things like compassion training or exercise, it increases. And it's basically your first line of defense against things that threaten your upper respiratory tract. You want to guess what one of those things is? Coronavirus. And they wanted to know, just 5 minutes, can that increase SIGA? What they found is that just 5 minutes actually made you less anxious, made people happier, and it actually, you might have felt this a little bit, it gives you a little energy, a little mental energy, which is quite interesting. And actually for me, when I called this up, I was actually thinking of my little brother, who's somewhere here in the audience. There he is. He just drove all the way from Los Angeles today to be here with a significant other. And when I did this, I thought about him and his significant other. They're musicians, and they are on stages a lot like this. And I might have thought, well, the first time I saw them, I was a little nervous for them. I'd never seen them sing together. I don't know what it's going to be like for them to be on stage together. And as soon as I saw them, it just melted my heart, because they are super in love, and you can see it on the stage when they sing, right? So I brought that up in my body, and I just let it sit there in my heart for a second. And that tends to activate you, right? It tends to make you feel good. But it also increases SIGA for up to 6 hours, just 5 minutes. Now, you just did about 2 minutes, so I probably gave you about 2 hours of health and immunization. And I hope we do that, because we're still in a pandemic. It's a huge increase for 5 minutes of compassion training. And so there's something very deep going on here about activating compassion in these positive states that's protecting you against stress. And if you think about evolution, well, what would be the point of that? Well, we as people, through history, have been through lots of pandemics, and there's lots of things that are attacking our bodies. And so this is actually helping us to be resilient to things like that. Okay, so if this is so good, why aren't we just being compassionate all the time? Well, compassion is competing against all the other things that helped you survive and evolve as well. And it's also competing against lots of new things like arguments on Facebook. There's that stupid person on Facebook, they're completely wrong, and you got to get on there and prove them right, or the world is going to fall apart, right? So that's on you. And you can't really bring your compassion on Facebook because this person doesn't deserve it, right? Well, if you go back and watch Leslie's talk from last week, go see Maha's talk next week, compassion is crucial in these cases. But it's often pushed down below because we have all of these other things that are fighting for our attention. And so one thing that the science can tell you is that if you elevate your baseline compassion just a little bit, bring it on Facebook and use it in that fight, it's going to make you feel better. It's going to give you a better connection with that person. You may actually hear them so that you can prove them wrong. It might actually help you win the fight. And so what can science do to help us do that? Well, as I said, I think by learning about how it works, it can give you insight into the own process inside of you. And so it's a biological process. It's also a psychological process that's unfolding over time. And now here's a little more fleshed out version of our model. This is an amalgam of several different papers that I put together. But the basic idea is these are the core muscle groups of compassion, if you want to think about it like that. If you're trying to train it, there's different groups that you can train, like your muscles. The first part is becoming aware that someone is suffering. The second part is feeling for them, feeling that empathy. And that's the sort of empathic brain that we know about. But then you have to tolerate that stress. So with that soldier story I gave you, it's very stressful, and I have to regulate that. Or either I'm going to run away or just sit there and do nothing. And so you have to tolerate that. One way that the science says is helpful is you can actually create a self-other distinction. So often we think we want to merge with people's suffering, but actually if you figure out what's theirs and you figure out what's yours, and take a little time for yourself, and then reapply your attention back, it can actually help you to regulate what you're feeling yourself. And then once you do that, or other things, you move into the connection, you move into the motivation, and you get to the good stuff. You get to that compassionate feeling or that compassionate act. And one really important thing about that is that you have to feel like you can have an impact. And that's really important, and we're seeing that in some of the studies, that for you to feel motivated, you have to feel like your action's going to do something, have an impact on someone else. And if you don't move down that chain, what can often happen is you can get stuck in empathy. Now, unfortunately, this is happening to our doctors and nurses to a point that really breaks my heart. They are overwhelmed with suffering, and it leads to empathic distress, or what's now being called compassion collapse, which is a horrible term. Nobody should have to deal with that. But there are things that can help you deal with this if you're not in that horrible situation, where you can take a little space so that you don't focus too much on the pain and empathy that you're feeling, and you can reorient yourself to help the person that you're trying to help. Now, doctors and nurses don't have the time to do that because they're dealing with so much, but if you're not in that environment, you can have a chance to take that distance and do that yourself. So how do you do that? How do you not get stuck in empathy? Well, one thing that's popping up in the literature is actually increasing your mindfulness. So mindfulness is being present in the moment and having some of that equanimity that we talked about. So being balanced, being open to experience, and really being able to pay attention to what's going on inside of you and what's going on outside of you. And when you do that, it shifts the attention from you back onto the person, which can be really important for moving you from empathy into tolerating and on and on. Now, this is one thing that we're studying in our lab, the SIMA lab at the University of Arizona. We're actually using neurotechnology like brain stimulation to try to boost people's baseline equanimity or to help people learn equanimity faster so that they can apply that when they're trying to be compassionate or learn compassion in other situations like that. We're also using it to test some of the parts of the brain that I talked about that we think are involved in compassion so we can add to the science. Now, once you figure out how to get to the green area in our model, you start getting some of that compassion glow. What tends to happen is you start doing things both for yourself that are compassionate, but for other people, importantly. And you start connecting to other people. And I love this study by Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues. They went and found people who were about to get a big bonus at work, and they didn't know. And they asked a simple question. If you spend the bonus on yourself, does it make you less happy than if you spend the bonus on someone else like your spouse? And guess what they found? Spending the money on someone else makes you happier, and that effect lasts for up to 6 to 8 weeks. It's pretty cool, right? Just a simple act of giving money to someone else, buying a car or something like that. But being scientists, they wanted to know, is this just a correlation or is this a real thing? So they brought people in the lab, they gave them money, and they randomly assigned them to spend the money on yourself or spend the money on someone else. And again, they replicated this effect, so it makes you happier to spend that money. And then science keeps going, of course, and now they've put people inside of an MRI scanner, and they wanted to know when you're in a situation where you're asked to give, does the little part of the brain that we think is involved in making the decision of giving, does that communicate with the part of the brain that makes you feel good, the pleasure center? And that's what you see on the screen. So when you decide to make that giving choice, it communicates directly to the pleasure center and increases activation. So you're wired for that. Giving makes you feel good, and it's really sort of wired in for you to do that. But the benefits don't stop there, of course. As you know, just with mindfulness, training compassion, cultivating inner compassion for yourself, and acting compassionately in the world tends to have a broad host of benefits for your health, all the way from immunity, boost your well-being, it helps with anxiety and depression, and it helps you heal faster. And I think a lot of that is due to this reduction of stress, this managing of stress, and this protection that we talked about. But another part that hasn't been looked at so far is actually the social connection and the social bonds that compassion is creating. Now, we can look to the loneliness literature to ask why this might be the case. And we know, actually, that loneliness is super bad for your health. And this is hard to say because we're living through an epidemic of loneliness due to the pandemic, but to be honest, it was happening before the pandemic. We know that loneliness is as bad for you as smoking a bunch of cigarettes every day. Loneliness is as bad for you as being obese, as not working out. It's super, super bad for your health. And not only that, but a new study just came out by Best and his colleagues showing that the lonelier that you are, the more fear you have for compassion. And that really breaks my heart because lonely people are put in a situation where it's a catch-22. People may actually be trying to give them compassion, and they have this fear response to it. And why is that? Well, because they're protecting themselves. That fear is there, and that loneliness is happening because there's a pandemic, right? We have to be afraid of this virus because we don't want to get it. And so researchers are working on this and trying to figure out ways to help people with loneliness boost. But what we do know is that compassion is going to help you maintain those social connections so you don't slip into a situation like that. Now, you might be thinking I've given you some type of hack on compassion, that all you got to do is go out there and be compassionate and you're going to get all these health benefits. It's going to make you live longer. It's going to give you protection from coronavirus. Well, the truth is there's no hack for it. That your intention to be compassionate and your ability to sort of get in there with other people's suffering, be a little bit vulnerable. If you've ever seen any of Brené Brown's talks on vulnerability, you should go check those out. But being able to hold that space and be a little bit uncomfortable to move into that green area might be the crucial piece to leading to a lot of these health benefits that we're talking about. And this is a great study by Sarah Cornath and her colleagues, where they looked at a survey that followed people all their lives, from the 1950s to the 2000s. And they were asking a simple question: if you volunteer, does it make you live longer? The answer is yes. We knew that from other studies. But in this study, they wanted to know, does your intention predict the outcome? So if your reason for volunteering is because you want to post it on Facebook to look good, or because you're having a hard day and you think it'll just make you feel good, that doesn't lead to the longevity effect. You die at the same rate as people who don't volunteer. However, if you respond with things like, I want to be compassionate, I want to connect with people's suffering, and I want to help them lessen that suffering. That's why I'm doing this volunteering act. Those are the people who live longer. So that ability to get in there with people and to feel with them and to put yourself out there, that's really the thing that was predicting this longevity effect, which I think is pretty cool. So far there's no hack on this system. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to be vulnerable with people. And when you do that, you might start asking, well, where am I starting with compassion? What's my compassion baseline? You might think that some people are compassionate and some people aren't, and that's the end of the story. Well, the story is that you're wired for it, but you have to cultivate it. And everyone is going to have a different trouble at different stages of this model, and this model is probably not totally right. Science will update this. But for many of you, like me, you might have trouble somewhere between empathy and tolerating the discomfort. You might feel too much empathy, for example. Or for me, I have a little bit of not wanting to feel it, and so I push it away. So you can train that. And the science is very clear in saying what 2,500 years of contemplative practice has been telling us, is that this can be trained. You can elevate the baseline level, and you can bring more of it into your life. Now actually, when that thing happened with the soldier at the beach, I started getting curious about compassion. And I went out and I started learning it for myself. I looked up, on the internet at the time, and I found something called loving kindness meditation. Now in this practice, you just sort of sit, and I won't make you do this one, but you just sort of sit with yourself. You try to do a little bit of compassion, which for me was hard to do self-compassion. And once you get through that, you start sort of trying to elevate different states. So you say things like, may I be happy? And try to feel that happiness. May I be safe? And try to feel a time when you feel safe. You're just sort of cultivating these states. And once you can figure out how to be kind to yourself, which I know is hard for many of us, you move on to easier people, my significant other, for example, my brother, my family, and then you get to neutral people. Neutral people for me were people like cashiers at the grocery store. So I started thinking about the cashier. May they be happy, feeling some happiness for the cashier. May they be safe. May they be free of suffering. And I started going to the grocery store and having the most incredible conversations with cashiers. And it got to the point where my girlfriend at the time, who wasn't meditating, who thought this was kind of some hippie weird stuff, she sat me down one day and she said, you got to stop going to the grocery store. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was like, it's weird. You're having these 30-minute conversations. I don't know what's going on. And I soon found out that she thought I was flirting with the cashiers. But what I was doing is I was elevating my baseline levels of compassion, and it was spilling out into the world. And that's something we see as you train your compassion. Now, I told you that there's 5 minutes of compassion is going to give you some protective qualities. You might think I told you a hack, right? Well, the truth is it's a little more complicated than that. Doing 5 minutes is great for you, and you should start there. But the science is telling us what seems kind of obvious. The more you do, the more effect you get, just like with exercise. So in one study that's actually from Thaddeus Pace, who's a professor here at the University now of Arizona, they put people in a situation where they stressed them out like crazy. This is something called the Trier stress test. So they bring you in, and they put you in front of people who you think are experts at giving talks. And then they say, write your downtown lecture series in 5 minutes. Go. And you write it, you write it, you write it. You're already freaking out. And then you give your talk. There's a camera. They're talking about broadcasting it. And as soon as you start, they stop you and they say, you suck. Start again. And it's incredibly stressful. And it's funny because, again, these are compassion researchers, and they're putting their subjects in these situations. But they wanted to know, how much training do you need with something called cognitively based compassion training to get an effect on stress reactivity? And in science, we always look at different ways to look at stress. So we looked at another measure earlier. Now we're looking at interleukin-6 and cortisol. And what they found in this study is CBCT, compared to a control condition, actually didn't give you any benefit on stress reactivity. However, the more that you practiced with CBCT, the more you got an effect. So the less distress and the less of this interleukin-6, which is a measure of inflammation. And so this is the more realistic picture. It's great to say 5 minutes is going to give you an effect. It will in certain cases. But really what it looks like is that you got to get to a sufficient level. So these people were practicing for 6 weeks, some of them for 7 times, practicing up to 7 times a week. It's like exercise. You really are going to have to engage with it to get the effects that I was talking about. You can't just expect 5 minutes to be this magic bullet for you. Now, something really interesting happens, and this is the part that I love of this talk. Compassion starts becoming contagious. Now, contagion has been a very bad word, obviously, over the last 2 years, but there's a lot of good things that can spread. Compassion, love, kindness, happiness. We have science that shows us that those things also spread through networks. And one study that I really like was actually looking at, if you elevate your baseline level of happiness, how many people does that impact? And it turns out it's about 3 other people in your network. And if you become happier, the next person you interact with becomes 19% more happier. I sort of love that they put a number to it. And the next person they interact with becomes 12% more happier. It's 12% happier. So it sort of spreads out in the network, and you can cluster these networks and look at whether people who are happy get surrounded by happy people, and the answer is yes. People who are upset and depressed get surrounded by people who are upset and depressed. And so we know that these emotions, these feelings, spread through our networks, much like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? This is probably what the news media has based their whole model on. That stuff spreads. Well, it looks like compassion may do something like that. And one study that I really love was looking at altruism. This, to be honest, was looking at something called altruistic punishment. Don't worry about that. We're not going to talk about that. You can look it up later. But they were looking at whether one altruistic act would cascade through a network and impact people that were far away from the action. And it's exactly what they found. So when one person did something altruistic to another person, and this is in a video game scenario, you could see the action sort of spreading through the network. They called it a cascade of altruism. We don't yet have a study on compassion of this, but compassion, I think, is very similar. It's probably spreading through networks in the same way. And when you look at these types of studies, the number 3 tends to pop up. So if I elevate my baseline compassion and I go out in the world, I'm likely to impact 3 other people. They call this elevation. If someone watches a compassionate act, it tends to elevate their own mood, and then they're more likely to go out and do it themselves. So I was talking to the graduate student in our lab, Brian Lord, and he said, you know, it sort of sounds like the R-naught of coronavirus. Do you know what the R-naught is? So that's the rate of transmission of a virus. So if coronavirus has an R-naught of 3, if I get it, I give it to 3 other people. If they get it, they give it to 3, so you get 9, and it starts growing exponentially. So compassion likely has an R-naught somewhere around 3. So if you cultivate inner compassion and self-compassion, you'll probably spread it out to 3 other people. And that's how you can see networks changing with compassion. And so I hope that convinces you that you should try some of this and make it a habit. But I actually think science will go a step further, and it will recommend compassion next to the things it's already recommending. So you should eat better, more leafy greens, you should exercise more, and you should do compassionate meditation and meditation training in and of itself. It has protective qualities over you, it will increase your social connection, and it will be good for our society as a whole, as a network. And so I think what you can learn so far from what we've said is that you are indeed wired for this, much in the same way you're given muscles, and when you decide to work out, what do? You look up where the gym is, you figure out where the people are who are working out. You learn about your muscles. If you're like me, you get an app on your phone that teaches you about your muscles. You develop it, right? It's not just easy. You don't just go to the gym and you're like, Hulk Hogan or something. You have to work at it. And compassion is likely the same, and I think that science is starting to tell us that as well. Okay, so now there's a scientist on the stage. He's telling you got to worry about something else. Now, next to healthy eating and exercise, now you got to worry about compassion. And I know that if you put it next to all the other things you're worrying about, you don't want to have another thing, right? You're worried about climate change and social injustice, racial injustice, all of these big sort of things that feel like a lot of suffering is about to come. And if you think about applying your compassion to that scale, you're going to get compassion collapse. I don't actually think we're designed to think about solving the world's problems at this scale. We're designed to solve problems in small groups, to feel compassion one-on-one. Actually, try just starting with yourself. That's hard enough to love yourself and have compassion for yourself. And so I think what the science can say is that, yes, compassion is maybe one of the fundamental answers to these problems, but they have to start local. You have to start with local training in your own community. And when you start local, when you start here in this room, just elevating a little bit of your compassion, and if compassion has an R0 of 3, then it starts looking like this. You elevate 3 people around you. Those 3 people might get a little bit of elevation, right? And then they go out and start spreading it. And then they spread it again to 3 people, and you can sort of see how this works. And so if I calculate the R0 of 3 of compassion for this room, and let's just estimate there's 300 people, then if every one of you goes home today, does 5 minutes, or maybe reach out to Leslie Langbert and go do 6 weeks of compassion training, then you're going to at least spread it to 3 other people. There's 300 people, we're already going to reach 900 people just from this room. And if we can elevate those 900 people, it goes spreading out to 2,700 people. You keep running this experiment 6 more times, you get to the population size of Tucson. Just 6 iterations. So imagine if we all just had compassion sit-ins on the weekend, and we just got as many people in Tucson to come be compassionate and train on it, it'll start spreading out like wildfire. But the really interesting thing about exponentials is that if you run this 10 more times, you get to 5 billion people. That's just 26 iterations of this experiment. And you run it one more time, you get to 9 billion, so you surpass the population size of the planet, right? So I think this is what we do. We start local. We start here in our community. We look for compassion gyms, right? Like the Center for Compassion Studies is a place where you can go work out this compassion muscle. And then you bring it into your life and you watch how it can transform your inner state and watch it spill over into your life. And you might actually be interested to learn that Tucson has a compassion charter on the books. So legally, we are a city of compassion, right? So it's your civic duty. I'm not just telling you this as a scientist. You need to go out and do it for your citizens. And I think once you start doing this, you'll start seeing how it transforms your life, just with even 5 minutes. And you'll start seeing how that can transform your connections in this community and how that can spill out into the rest of the world. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Was that marvelous? Thank you.
Thank you.
Please join us next Wednesday. Dr. Maha Nasser from the School of Middle East and North African Studies will do another excellent talk on the social and political dimensions of compassion. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.